all of you this, my friends. The greatest media cover-up that I have ever seen has involved the war in Iraq. They lied about the reasons why George Bush went into the war. They said it was only for WMDs. It wasn't. That's a lie. I covered his speech when he made that famous State of the Union address. It was to build a functioning democracy in the Middle East. That was one of the reasons. It was to overthrow a fascist tyrant and dictator. That was one of the reasons. And let me tell you what the mainstream media also covered up. I interviewed people, specifically a former high-ranking intelligence military official by the name of Dave Gobbets, a man who served his country courageously for years, a man with expert knowledge of the Middle East. And he went down into Iraq right after it was liberated. And he was there looking, officially as part of the U.S. government, to search for Saddam's former officials and former Iraqis, that there were 4 hidden bunkers, 2 of them underneath the Euphrates River, 30 to 40 feet underground. We went in. I saw them. They could be nothing else but places to stockpile nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons. Who needs bunkers hidden 30 to 40 feet underground? And then we did testing, and we found traces of nuclear radiation there. It was radioactive. The whole site was radioactive. And when we came, because he's blonde hair and blue-eyed, and many of the other Americans on his search-finding team were also blonde-haired and blue-eyed, people assumed we were Russians. And we said, what? Why would you assume we're Russians? And this is what the Iraqis told them. Not one, hundreds of them. There were Russians here before you Americans invaded. When you were debating the UN Security Council resolution, this place was crawling with Russian military advisors. We don't know what they were doing, but we saw trucks. We saw cars. We saw jeeps. And things were being loaded onto those trucks and those jeeps and those cars from deep beneath those bunkers. And I said, how did you know they were Russian? Because we asked them and we spoke to them. And many of them liked to drink vodka. And they were smuggling in vodka and belting back a little vodka when they thought they weren't being seen. What were the Russians doing there? Satellite imagery, American satellite imagery, straight from our Pentagon and our Defense Department, captured hundreds of trucks lining up, going across into the Syrian border, from the Iraq-Syrian border, led by Russian convoys. What were those trucks carrying? Why were they being sent off into the Syrian border before we invaded in 2003? We know that the Russians were arming Saddam's regime. We know they claimed themselves they were selling him nuclear missile technology, biological and chemical weapons. So all the Russians were selling them, and suddenly all the military advisors were there, and all of these bunkers were deep underground, and yet nobody in the mainstream media had the guts to even interview Dave Gobbets and his investigative team. Never mind go to Iraq and go to those bunkers. My friends, the media never wanted you to know about the truth about the war in Iraq. They were determined to paint the narrative as an illegal, immoral, criminal war. And they used every bit of propaganda to demonize George Bush. And so my question to you is this. Now, with the Iraqis having succeeded holding national elections, with our troops slowly coming home, the war winding down, if you knew then what you know now, if you could turn the clock back 7 years, 7.5 years, would you still support the Iraq war? Would you support the Iraq war? My question to you is a very simple one. Knowing now, if you knew it then, would you support the Iraq war? Was the Iraq